Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome back to everyone to this month's The Common Thread. I appreciate you for coming to our monthly webinar. As you know, it's the last Friday of every month for 1 hour from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Zoom. And this month, The Common Thread, we will be exploring and unpacking Wired for Brilliance. Embracing neurodivergence as a catalyst for innovation and inclusion. So this month we are welcoming Tyler Keith and Michaela Titsworth. So we want to just go ahead and get into it and have a robust conversation about neurodivergence and how we can thrive in workplaces when we embrace different ways of thinking, learning, and problem solving. Neurodivergent individuals bring strengths and creativity that can spark innovation, but too often they face barriers of belonging. Our conversation today asks, what does it mean to take creative people and make workplaces where every mind can shine? So I'm honored again to welcome our featured guest, Michaela Titsworth. And we also have Tyler Keith. He is the clinical director. Both of them are with Clarity Counseling Center here in Wilmington, North Carolina. I will tell you all, it took me a while. I've been having this topic on my heart for a long time, but I really vetted the counseling centers that I wanted to have this conversation. And one of the reasons why is because I was looking for a counseling center that was extremely inclusive in their staffing. And so when I looked at the Clarity Counseling Center staff, I saw a very inclusive staff in how it was represented. Oftentimes, some of the counseling centers I saw were very singular in those that they had as far as their staff. And so, because of this, and because of their wide range of topics in terms of behavioral health and what they do for the community, the various ways that you can connect with this counseling team and the various insurances that this counseling team also accepts, it was very important that I allowed them an opportunity to come and talk with us about this particular topic and highlight the additional work they do. So we want to start with Michaela. Could you introduce yourself and how did you arrive to Wilmington, North Carolina?
Absolutely. So hello, I'm Michaela. Um, I am,
Love your glasses, by the way.
thank you. Thank you so much. So let's see. I started out like knowing I wanted to do psychology of some sort. That led me to needing an internship, which was working in residential crisis with specifically adults with intellectual disability and developmental disabilities. And so that was kind of my, I guess, opening of this passion to work with neurodivergent populations, neurodivergent people, and to kind of bridge that gap, especially because I think we came across where it was residential crisis, the most extreme cases
Mhm,
and the
mhm.
most dire for advocacy, home placement, employment, anything like that. And so I think there's a big gap between that with like outpatient therapy, for example.
Mhm,
And I knew that was something I wanted to do, but then I felt like I had to choose between the two.
mhm,
Um, and so that's really been my kind of framework for finding where I fit. And
mhm,
that's sort of what led me to Wilmington, North Carolina in general. Essentially, my partner and I were just bored of where we were at for grad school, and we put together a spreadsheet and looked at job opportunities. And yeah, when I interviewed with Clarity, I think exactly what you saw, I saw as well, like an opportunity to not have to choose, and for there to
mhm,
be a lot of uh, individualizing, like framing your role around you and your specialties around your strengths. And having neurodivergence myself, having ADHD, I think that's really important. And then wanting to bridge that gap and work with adults with autism to navigate a lot of the things that they might not necessarily qualify for higher level services for.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. And where are you from?
I'm from Abingdon, Virginia.
Oh, God bless you. You know, North Carolina.
Yeah, yeah.
Ooh, I'm a Tar Heel, true and true.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. So, last but not least, we are going to be speaking with Tyler Keith. Tyler Keith is the clinical director. Tyler, share about you and also Clarity Counseling Center and how you came to Wilmington and Clarity.
Thank you, Miss Fawn. It's wonderful to be here and kind of talking with y'all. I appreciate the time. Um, I will definitely kick off and say Michaela is going to be our content expert. She truly walks the walk. Her credentials speak for herself. Once you get to know her as a person, you see the passion behind the letters. And so a lot of my experience coming into Clarity, I'm not sure if I even spoke on this, but I actually did a lot of applied behavioral analysis or ABA therapy working with children with autism. I did that for a number of years as a registered behavioral technician before I actually moved into my counseling world. But similar to Michaela, I started working in the daycare systems as a daycare teacher and started seeing some kiddos. I ran a two-year-old classroom, 18 of them, and I loved the chaos. But one of my kiddos was getting early screened for it. And so I got to kind of see some of the early interventions pushing into my classroom and seeing the things that they were asking of me as a daycare teacher to provide that support. And I was really attracted to that. And so then kind of went on to my master's program, worked as an RBT, registered behavioral technician, working with kids with autism and families. And that's where like my passion for family therapy came in and working with families with kiddos and early intervention. And so that's kind of actually what attracted me to this discussion today because moms and dads who are employees also have children who are neurodivergent. And how do employee workspaces support employees who are doing the best they can as moms and dads and also have titles in the workplace? And so that's where a lot of my passion comes from. To this day, I do a lot of work with individuals with ADHD and adults with autism. And it is a gift and very challenging at the same time to kind of see the gap in services that Michaela has
Yeah.
talked about so much
Mhm.
for children that I felt wonderful being able to kind of dabble in that world. But then when I started working with adults, I was like, where are these services?
Right.
Holy cow. And ironically, as I start working with moms and dads and they're helping their kids with early screening and they're seeing their kids with their symptoms and they're going, oh, that looks like
That
me.
part. Yeah, we're gonna get there. Yes. It's
Mhm.
like,
So
is this
I'm
me?
excited to talk more about it.
Yes, I love that you brought that into it. So we're going to get right into it. First of all, I want to let our chat, those in our participants know, please type in where you're from and interact with each other. You should have the ability to type in chat. And also, if you have any questions while we're going along, please go ahead and put that inside of the chat so you can not, excuse me, inside of the question and answer box so you can not forget your question and that we can make sure that we get to your question. So the chat is available. You should be able to, again, type any questions, let us know where you are viewing us from and go ahead and put your questions in it. So let's get right into it. This is an exciting topic for me. I personally have someone in my life that is neurodivergent, and it's extremely important that they are seen in the workspace. And not, why can't you just? You know, we were just talking to Michaela earlier about certain phrases that people make towards those that are neurodivergent because there's no empathy, you know, or understanding when it comes to this conversation. There's still a lot of stigma that comes along when we have the conversation about neurodivergence, and people don't understand the wide range, the large spectrum of what neurodivergence looks like. So, with that understanding, first let's discuss what exactly do we mean when we say neurodivergence. So, either one of you can take that and run with it.
I would say, like you emphasized, it's a very broad term, as it should be. It's not one size fits all, but I think at least from my points in the conversation and key highlights, I would I'm framing it as referring to a broad range of variations in the brain function, cognitive
Mhm.
processes, anything that is difficult or strays from neurotypical. It's natural variations in how the brain processes, learns, and interacts.
Okay, perfect. So when just giving a brief snapshot, it can be, so from what I'm hearing you, it can be everything as small as OCD, or ADHD to something as large as full autism.
Yeah.
Am I correct in that
Yes.
understanding? So that means that can be that's a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
lot of people. And so when we're having this conversation as adults in this space, could it be that people are dealing with some of these particular behaviors and not realize that they themselves are dealing with these particular behavior challenges and not realize that they are actually neurodivergent? Is that a possibility?
Absolutely. I mean, the number changes all the time, but I think most recent 1 in 45 adults are neurodivergent. So if not yourself, then you definitely already work with or know someone that is neurodivergent.
And so, with that understanding, what does it mean to be neurodivergent in the workplace?
Mm.
Mhm.
In the workplace, it means that, like you think of workplace, any institution has to have structure, has to have
Mhm,
rules, processes, systems, and often those have to be somewhat rigid, of course. Like there has to be
mhm,
a system to getting the work done, whatever that. A lot of times there's a team element and then, sub teams within that. So
mhm.
what that means is people of all different types, all different diversities, neurodivergence, all of those things are all coming into this one kind of like monochrome structure. So in
Mhm,
the workplace, it's looking specifically at how people think differently, communicate
mhm.
differently. Essentially, what environments do they need to thrive to reach the goals of whatever the work is?
I love how you brought
Absolutely.
that up,
I
Michaela. I
like
love how
that
you brought
too.
that up.
Could you expand on that a little bit more, Tyler?
Yeah, I think like what Michaela's talking about, like if I can kind of speak about it like from a managerial perspective,
Mhm,
like how I kind of have seen this not only like in our space here at Clarity, but also in other like positions where I'm kind of helping onboard people or I'm helping them acclimate to their role or their setting. There's a lot of times individuals who kind of falling into that category neurodivergence. Notice how Michaela and I are being kind of careful about using labels like individuals with
mhm,
ADHD, individuals with OCD. No. We're just
mhm,
talking about
mhm.
people who acknowledge that they have preferences about how they work.
That's
And
right.
so I try to be cautious when I say like neurodivergence because it really does boil down to functioning.
That's
What
right.
helps you function best?
Mhm,
And you don't have to be a therapist to provide curiosity or to provide accommodation to someone
mhm,
and how they function in an environment. And so for me, like what that looks like is when someone's onboarding, I ask them about, are you someone who prefers a lot of autonomy or do you like frequent check-ins? Are you someone who likes to have your
mhm,
content in writing or in video? Are you someone who
mhm.
wants to be able to read this content first and this discuss it? Or do you need hands-on engagement with this? And then I kind of walk side by side with you. Um, a lot of that stuff can look like an ADA accommodation or if we're in a school setting, an IEP accommodation, but
Mhm.
it's also just about being human, like how do you learn best and how do
That's
I set
right.
you up in a way that makes you feel good
How do
and
you prefer to
confident?
receive communication?
Yeah.
Bingo.
Mhm,
Bingo.
mhm,
Yep. And I think
mhm.
when we take that conversation out of I have ADHD, so I need, right?
Yeah.
That's like requiring someone to be very vulnerable on the front end to an employer. My partner works in human resources, and so I kind of like get to see some of those like ways that they navigate that kind of administratively. But it's a whole different way of thinking when we, in a workplace or as a manager, as someone who works and employs people, it's so much more freeing when you say, what's your learning style? What's your preference? Like, how can I support you? What works for you? And then I help that fit into the structure that Michaela was talking about.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah, I would add on to that really quickly that it is exactly like hearing this conversation. If I'm an employer, I don't have to immediately think, okay, need to go read as many resources about this. I need to go like look at what's the DSM criteria? How do I spot this? And I definitely do not need to try to script how, if I'm noticing, I don't need to script how to ask someone. That disclosure is very personal, and
Mhm.
it's also just not necessary to be
Right.
a leader and to promote inclusivity. Asking those questions, even just like a very simple example, like just yesterday, talking to Tyler on the phone. If he didn't know that I have ADHD, which that's different, if someone decides to talk about that openly, put it in Slack to your team, that's fine. But if he didn't know that, we would have had the same conversation the way he handled it. He didn't need to know what the label was or what I had missed something. And it was like, hey, I asked, can we figure out a way to structure this that is within this time frame and doesn't look like X, Y, and Z? It would have been the same conversation if he didn't know.
And I think that that's extremely important, and that takes a lot of weight off of employers or managers, because what they immediately think is, here we go, here's something else I got to learn all about again. Here's another certification I got to send my HR through or my staffing through
Exactly.
to learn blah, 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 et cetera, right? And we're already in that space right now where there's a heaviness, in terms of employing, and which is why this topic is so important and relevant right now because of the space of where we are. And so so giving them tools that are I guess you could say that are less stressful, that allow them that opportunity to say, okay, I can breathe. I can just, all it is in some ways is, again, how do you best communicate in order for us to make this work? In order for us to support each other, in order for us to serve each other and get the best outcome and allow you to shine for what we've hired you for, right? Because when we interviewed you and we looked at your resume, we felt that you were the best one, and which is why we hired you. You were the cream of the crop, why we hired you. So how can
Well
we
put.
best shine that? How can we highlight your strengths so you can be the best employee as possible, right? And then that looks good on me as a manager, because when my staff thrives, I thrive, right? And so it's that partnership that we have to look to, and having that conversation, not looking at it at, oh gosh, here's another accommodation I need to make, for somebody else. Here's, somebody else on my team that's got fill in the blank type of thing. It's, for me, that's not where that conversation needs to look. That's not how you need to run that, because that's a negative perspective. And also, people don't always feel comfortable, to the point that you're making, disclosing the health issues. How many times did you fill out an application and you get to that part where it's like, do you have a disability? And I don't know about you, but I choose not to disclose. Because it's not your business. I should be able to share if I want to share. But most often people choose not to share because of the stigma, because of when they have shared in the past, how that looks and what people have said, and people's ignorance. And ignorance is not framing it in a negative perspective. Ignorance, period, is lack of knowledge. That is the actual definition, is
That's
lack
right.
of knowledge. And so when you don't have knowledge of a particular thing, we tend to make missteps, not intentionally at all, but accidental missteps, but I always tell people, it's not about your intent, it is about your impact. So, once it's done, you can apologize all day long, but that does not eliminate how that person ultimately ends up feeling, because their perception is reality. And if they feel offended or hurt, behind this particular thing, they have they're righteous in their feelings. So we want to prevent that from happening, and we want to really empower you with tools that will allow everybody in the workplace to thrive. So when we talk about that, what strengths and unique contributions are we going to say that these particular individuals in our communities bring to teams and organizations? Could you share a little bit in that space?
I want to preface to your point. I think that, Fawn, your topic comes at a perfect time, exactly with what you're saying. This is not just another policy, another inclusion training. When I say perfect time, I mean because businesses and just operations in general are coming through this time and space of automations, like virtual
Yes,
or
it is.
digital collaboration, hybrid working, all these things. So it's a perfect time because if we're redesigning a lot of those processes for anyway, then why not design it to work for every kind of brain? And so prefacing that with like, I found this really interesting statistic put out by the Harvard Business Journal
Mhm.
that teams with inclusive leaders are 17% more likely to
That's right.
report being high performing and 20% more likely to make high quality decisions, 29% more likely to engage in collaborative behavior. And then you
Mhm.
also see other stats about also attendance and performance, all of those being elevated through that. So, but it's not about the work output. That's a byproduct. It is exactly what you were saying, dignity, respect, and thriving for the whole workplace. So some of the strengths definitely include creativity, outside of the box thinking, persistence. You have like specifically speaking on the autism spectrum, special interests. Like that is something that if those barriers are reduced, whether it be sensory needs that people have, whether it be
Mhm.
flexible scheduling, whatever that looks like, that doesn't feel like work for these individuals. It's their passion, their interest. So they are
Mhm.
going to have a lot of outside of the box thinking, a lot of really innovative problem solving,
Mhm.
and just a lot of fresh perspective that disrupts maybe groupthink or something that we look at this again monochrome system and we think, yeah,
Mhm.
that's good, but there are things we miss. That's a lot of the strengths that we're talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah, I have
Michaela, you
to.
even had me thinking, oh, I'm so sorry,
No,
Miss
no, no,
Fawn.
no. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Mhm.
just to like scaffold what you're saying, Michaela, like some things that I've seen is like a lot of individuals who are like landing in the neurodivergent population tend to be brilliant pattern finders. So they will
Yes.
notice things that are happening across months and times or different spaces, and they will be able to kind of like see these different trends and threads that individuals who are more neurotypical tend to tackle every single time. Whereas
Mhm.
individuals in the neurodivergent community tend to see like this is a chronic challenge. Why aren't we doing
Right.
something
Right.
about this? And so I do think like that their ability to kind of see things and hold things in different ways helps them kind of put those puzzle pieces together in a different way. And so not only are they chronic pattern finders, but they also tend to draw connection in ways that is so unique.
Yeah.
So like I think about like when I'm in the break room and I'm hearing someone kind of talk with an individual about like their hobbies and interests, and like, oh my gosh, did you know that Jack is actually also a mountain climber? Because I was just talking to him about that. Like they kind of turn into these operators, plugging
Mhm.
connections in ways that build community culture, that kind of help
Mhm.
drive resources to people who maybe wouldn't have known about them. They tend to be these individuals that really just help to kind of elevate communication in the office space. And I think when that's not fostered, that tends to be looked at as the squeaky wheel, the person who chronically has a problem, the person who's a chatterbox, and then won't sit
The
still,
quirky
in an
person.
office. Yeah. And so when we flip that on its head and we actually
Right.
create spaces for that to be channeled, it's called rocket fuel. I literally have a book right here that on my work shelf that talks about like when you can channel that, it creates rocket fuel in the workplace.
You know what I was thinking about that immediately came to mind when you use the term monochromatic. I think about back many years ago, before your time. I'm sure that you all weren't around for this, but I'm an older person. Television used to come on, and it would say live and in Technicolor. And that's what I think of when I think about neurodivergence. It's Technicolor. Is
I
that
love
when
that.
they see life and they see the world, they don't just see green. They see the vibrance of it all, which is why I designed the flyer in the way it was. Brilliance, large colors in that way, because they see all the variants and the variations of how different things can be, and their memory is long and strong, for things. And so, I have a person, as I mentioned, in my family, when he was little, like he could tell you all the capitals of every country, of every continent, and he could give you all the actual, not only the capitals of those things, like the top three, resources and exports of that. And he was fast. I was like, I don't even know this, and I'm in my 20s at that time, and you were just running me. You're like, tell me this, tell me that type of thing. He just had such a beautiful brain and how he,
Mhm.
absorbed things. But then on the other thing, to sensories, he was very activated by fire trucks. So whenever the
Mm.
sound or the horn from the fire truck would come, it was very, very uncomfortable for him. This is before we got into that space of learning that headphones were a great thing. For
Yeah.
those that are experiencing sensory issues, right? And so, those are ways, and of course, and I'm so glad for evolution and how we pick up and we learn about that. But this is what you're talking about when we talk about automation. How can we look at these things in a way that is going to bring in that automation, bring in, those sensory needs, but yet at the same time, highlight those technicolor moments and connect people into those spaces that are really allowing them to thrive. Maybe this person is your great data analyst, and you need to, they got hired in for this particular thing, but they really are best in that data analyzation because they remember numbers very well. They can track those numbers, they can see those trends across spaces. Maybe that person is your historical person, that can
Yeah.
do your deep research and pull in all that information and get those little innuendos and facts that we probably would have just got that surface level fact, right? But they know how to dig deep and get that additional information that could really highlight, that topic that you're talking about and bring some innuendos and storytelling to the narrative of what it is that you're saying that bring that personal touch, because a lot of times when we're talking about data, it can be so just sanitized.
Mm.
So we want to be, how can you make this more compelling for people to want to give you that grant? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So have that person that's on your research team that actually thrives in that space. Or maybe that's that person that's a talkative person, and you might want to put them on the front line, that can connect with people and have that conversation. And they might say a little, odd things off here and there, but explore that, celebrate that, and not make it like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that you said that type of thing. Because when you do that, that embarrasses them, that brings shame, and that doesn't bring dignity. So these are when we talk about creative ways and how we can highlight people with various
Mhm.
in various differences. It's just about, like you said, being inclusive. Right now, one of the dirty words, as we know, is diversity. But
Mm.
diversity, I always tell people all the time, diversity so often has been utilized in that space of racial context. Diversity is more, it's race and it's so many different things. It's also being inclusive of diverse minds and how we actually approach and have those conversations. So I love the direction that you're talking about when we're having these conversations about adults. Tell me about Rocket Fuel. Did I say that correct? Was that the name of the book?
You did, yeah. Yeah, so Rocket Fuel is actually pulled from the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or EOS. It's a way for small business to kind of think about how they structure their systems for sustainability. And
Mhm.
so at Clarity, we're constantly trying to be innovative and exploring different ways to create systems that can accommodate, I would love to say all, but most,
Mhm.
because we're always learning and then we workshopping it, but Rocket Fuel is kind of the continuation of that, of thinking about your leaders. There's visionaries, and then there's integrators. And so,
Yeah.
ironically, our leader is Ms. Karin Kassab. We are 10 years in business under her leadership. And she's a classic visionary in the profile of Rocket Fuel, who
Mhm.
traditionally have ADHD. And then I'm actually her integrator. She has a few of us here. And what that means is it's the book is looking at how brains operate naturally and
Mhm.
creating
Gotcha.
roles around that. And so, although Rocket Fuel will talk about visionaries typically are kind of untethered and big dreamers, And that's associated with the symptomology of ADHD. Like they kind of took that language right out of it, and they were just talking about this is how
Mhm.
this brain works. Get them in that space, and it'll be great. And then it talks about me, like I'm a high detailed person. I love organization. That's not my natural setting, but I thrive in it, so I have to create it. And so
Mhm.
I do well developing that in systems in larger organizations. And so when for example Corinne is in her role when she's big dreaming and I'm in my role of organizing and facilitating, there's a lot less friction in the work environment, and actually it
Understood.
creates like even more momentum. And it's kind of like the idea of passion begets passion.
I got you. That makes a lot of sense. So those, if you would like to pick up that particular book, find your local book retailer. And as Tyler just gave us, that was a great book recommend, a book for you to choose from. Now, what barriers can we say that those who are experiencing neurodivergence often encounter at work? Would you all speak to?
Hmm.
Yeah.
You want to start with this one, Michaela?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is hard to answer because it is so different for every person, but I'll just give a general like common things that at least I hear and see in the people that I work with. So unclear expectations, like vague expectations. A lot of times people who are using like again virtual things, which we are having a lot more integration of, it tends to be a lot more specific just because it makes sense. You're typing, you might be bullet pointing, putting in step one, step two. But then when you're in the office and you're talking maybe to a colleague or someone in leadership, hey, can you get this done? I'm hoping it will include this, and this. It can be a lot more vague. So that's something that is a big barrier, vague instructions or unwritten rules. Overstimulating environments that can be like really open offices, noise, lighting, rigid scheduling, like lack of flexibility with that. I would honestly say probably like 95% of my individuals that I work with that have ADHD, they are all late to work. And I hear very commonly, they're like, my boss is okay with that because they know I get in, I'm efficient, I do the work in half the time. But for people who haven't reached that understanding or there isn't a lot of psychological safety within the
Mhm.
office for there to be that flexibility, it really limits them getting to shine their strengths. So that's a big one. Fear of stigma around disclosure. And then it can even be like as small as requiring cameras on during Zoom meetings. Like if someone can be so much more present in the meeting or reporting their data, having the camera off or not having to have the expectation of eye contact. It's things like
Mhm.
that. And then we have, just some more general executive functioning. People need different things. They need it written, they need a calendar. I would say that's like a general scoop that I would give for common barriers.
I have some ideas as well, if that's okay.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, because I think like from like the managerial perspective, honestly, the biggest barrier that I see is that accountability measures can sometimes be incredibly superficial. So like just like what Michaela was talking about, like we all know a part of the job description is to get to work on time. And so I oftentimes encourage people who are in leadership or even people who are kind of the informal leaders, like exercising the five whys. Why is this important? And why is that important? And why is that? And why is walk it backwards? Because a lot of times accountability systems are more about compliance and about performance and workplace belonging. And so when we like are actually really thinking about our accountability measures, what are they really measuring? And so I oftentimes use the example of glass balls and rubber balls. It's an example that was taught to me by one of my mentors. We're juggling a lot of stuff. And if we're thinking about if some of those drop, glass shatters, rubber bounces. And our accountability measure should
Oh,
really
I
be
love
looking
that.
out and building out the things that are protecting the glass balls that we're juggling. And if we're measuring, one, we need to like narrow down what we're measuring for in terms of accountability
Mhm.
for employee performance, workplace satisfaction, and things like that. We really need to be measuring the things that are the glass balls, not the rubber ones. And so, like, what does that mean? So, for example, if you're in a workplace where your performance is completing something to a certain percentage, like you need to get 75% of this done, or you need to be able to convert this many calls, you need to be whatever it may be,
Mhm.
being able to kind of look at like this employee chronically does well in Q1 and Q2, but then in Q3 and Q4 they're dropping. What oftentimes happens is it's perceived as a form of motivation or non-compliance, or they don't care, right? But then when you think about individuals who are neurodivergent, there's a lot going on when the seasons change. There's a
I
lot
was gonna
going
say
on.
seasonal. Mhm,
Yeah, right. Like there's
mhm.
a lot of different things going on. Like when like we start to have additional holidays that interrupt our routines and schedules, and travel plans, and
Mhm,
illnesses and sicknesses. Now throw in
mhm.
child management, school changes. Oh my gosh, like school
Overwhelming.
starting
Mhm,
alone. Yeah. Like that's when I see the most of my cancellations with all my individuals who one are in the population neurodivergence or are a parent or a caregiver
mhm,
to a child neurodivergence. That time of life is wild. So just making sure your accountability measures are really measuring what needs to be measured to facilitate success, not
mhm.
compliance. Because people in the neurodivergent communities talk. They're going to know which employers are accommodating and which employers aren't. So I do think that's a big barrier of just like
I do
balancing
too.
like accountability measures.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that those were excellent examples. And I loved how you spoke about glass balls versus rubber balls. And
Mm,
because that is important. Glass balls are things that, is these are things that we have to meet, you know what I'm saying? So for example, here at Health and Human Services, there are certain things that the state absolutely requires that we have to meet by these particular deadlines. There's no flexibility within it.
yeah,
That it's rigid. This is what they said. This is what it has to be done. Right. So that's a glass ball. However, the rubber ball would be how can we structure a team so we can get that done, that we can support you in those moments, that you need, some support. So how do we come together and put that together so we can meet, so that glass ball does not get broken. So I hear what you're saying with that. And that leads me directly into my next question. And I think that we're already kind of answering some of that, which is what strategies or practices can employers adopt. But before we get there, we're utilizing an acronym. And I'm someone who really likes to make things real for my audience. And we're using an acronym of ADHD. And so could you explain exactly what ADHD for those that we use it so frequently that I don't think people really understand what it is and why it's used in so many spaces. Could you share with that? Because it's actually two terms.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Michaela's our specialist, so take it away.
yeah, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And then there are some specifiers like predominantly inattentive type, hyperactive, and combined type. So essentially what that is if you think about autism and ADHD, they're both neurological. They are inherent functional differences in how the brain processes versus when we're talking about like OCD, things like that, we're talking typically neurochemical. These are neurological. And so what that can look like is honestly, there can be a lot of overlap, like sensory
Mm-hmm.
things, difficulty with organization. A lot of times, like some stigma around people with ADHD is they're not taking things seriously. Like Tyler said, chatterbox, their professionalism. Oh, that's a huge one because people
Mm-hmm.
with ADHD can often be seen as like they're very authentic, they're very like say things as they think them, which can really I think bump heads with this professionalism
Well,
expectation.
this aspect. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So but they're also extremely efficient and
Mm-hmm.
extremely motivated when there are things that they can be excited about. So I think there's another overlap with that too, with like rigid expectations, rigid rules that can make someone with ADHD feel really confined, like it's hard to get excited about something, and then that
Mm-hmm.
that limits their momentum too in the workplace.
Yeah, I hear exactly what you're saying with that because when you have someone who may be experiencing some of that, and I want to also say, y'all, some of us have all these same quirks. And in some of these behavior experiences or behavior habits that we have, and we just kind of dismiss them. And it's interesting that when we don't frame it or actually label it, right, under certain things, we find that it's okay. Or we say, oh, that's just how that person is, like, how Fawn is, kind of
Yup,
thing, right?
yup.
But once we then put the label into it, that's when the stigma comes. That's when, the negativeness and the assumptions and, all the misinformation and disinformation that's connected to that space, right? So I want you to kind of just, while we're having this conversation, just sit back and just think to yourself, like, what are some things that you are doing on a regular basis? Do you have to touch the desk a couple of many times before you walk out the door, or shut the door, or certain things that you have to do that is habit forming that you personally know that you do, that you have not disclosed to someone, the amount of times that you might have to turn a light out, before you walk out the door, or touch your keys, or, certain things that you are doing that are part of your behavior habits that you have just dismissed, like, oh, that's just how I am.
Yep.
And then as we are having these conversations, you start to realize, okay, this isn't, this, it is that, so just sit back as we're having this conversation and just relax into the space of just thinking about how you particularly do life. And what are some things that you find yourself doing on a regular habit, and that that it is vital to how you have to move before you can even get out the door, or when you do get into certain spaces that maybe someone has said that you are too much,
Mhm.
or because that's something that we hear, like, oh, you're just too much, there are ways that people have diminished people's strengths and creativity, because it's what they believe to be different. But those differences really are, the fact that you could very well be neurodivergent and not
Mhm.
realize it because someone has downplayed it, or you have not been in the space to be diagnosed. You were scared to be diagnosed. You didn't know what that would look like and how it would impact the rest of your life, or if you, as far as job and et cetera, et cetera. So I want to just kind of take a lot of the fear
Mhm.
off of this conversation, and the fright and the scare and the nervousness and all of that in terms of this discussion, because there's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be ashamed of. This is a easy conversation for you to do some self-reflection, and not only self-reflection on your particular behaviors, because you may not have anything that falls into these spaces, but those that you care about. And remember that most of the people that we work with them from 8 to 10 hours a day or more. So those people become family. So when I say those that you care about, I'm not just talking about biological people that you care about. I'm talking about people that you work with on a regular basis, and that person has grown to be someone that you have deep empathy, deep care for, deep concern, and you see these habits. How are you accommodating and making space for them? And I'm gonna just move accommodating, but I'm gonna just say making space for them. How are you making space where they can be their best selves? This is what this conversation is about. Of how
Mhm.
can we make space for those that may be doing things that may be just a little different. They may be the person that blurts out what's on their mind in the middle of the team meeting, and you're like, oh, here she go again. But she's speaking it, or he or they are saying things that we all want to say.
Mhm.
you know, and you're like, oh my gosh, here they go again. But some of us, sometimes those who may be experiencing neurodivergence, they're fearless. So they don't see all the barriers that others may see. So they think it's okay. Look, I'm gonna just tell you how I feel, and I'm gonna just speak to that space. And and after they've said what they have to say, they're moving on. They're just full of joy, full of happiness, or just keep it going. And you're like, they just said blah, blah, blah. They're not attached to it. There's no emotional attachment to it. They're just telling you the truth, how they see it. So think about that. They're not that person that is trying to intentionally put a hedge, in the way that you do things or a thorn in your side. It's just that's what they see. And again, go back to technical color. They see life in technicolor. So they see all of the things, whereas we can be very heterogeneous and very monochromatic in how we look at things. Am I speaking correctly, Michaela and Tyler, about our community?
Yeah, I would say so. And I would encourage, like, I guess this kind of double dips into the following discussion of strategies, but
Mhm.
I would say for what you were saying for the audience to think about themselves, uh, this is both a strategy that I think is amazing, which is kind of a one-page manual. So like if
Mhm.
I'm running a team, and it's, it's a sub team, maybe we're doing data, whatever, engineering company. If every person could have a one-page manual, and that's not just people who are in that population of neurodivergent, but every person on the team, even the team lead, the supervisor, essentially titled How to Work with Me. And I think that is such a good integration because you're doing a lot of collaborative work, and there's also a lot of guessing. Like if someone prefers, that's something I really respected about my initial conversations with Clarity Counseling Center, was it was one of the first few questions, which was like, how do you communicate? Imagine if like companies all around, big and small, each person could have like a one pager, sort of like a bio, but how do I communicate? Direct. What do I struggle with? Where do I work best? In a quiet space, not having to make eye contact. How do I focus the best? Having headphones on. Like it eliminates a lot of these fears because we're highlighting a lot of strengths of people in the neurodivergent population, but there's also sometimes there can be some harmful language about also putting a one size fits all, like they have superpowers to bring to the company, because for a lot of people it doesn't feel that way. It
That's
feels
right.
really hard, and it feels like they want to go in there and give 100% and do good work, but then I need my headphones to do that. And then I look antisocial. How do I make friends? Like if there could almost be these manuals for each person, it's not individualizing anyone, as
Yeah.
almost like a handshake. Like here's how I work, here's how you work.
I love that. One of the things I want to go before we even get to the manual, because I love the one page manual idea. I want to start in onboarding and in terms of interviewing. Okay. And when we have oftentimes we before you get to the interview panel, you have like certain questions that are asked in the interview space. One of the questions that I think should be eliminated from among many, but I really think it should be eliminated in terms of interviewing people, because I really don't think it. I think it's relevant, but I think it can be a challenge for most people. Is how do you deal with conflict? And I think that when we are having these conversations, especially with those that may be experiencing neurodivergence, that's a very challenging area for them to verbalize. Like, how do you deal with conflict? Because one, it leads down into neurodivergence, and they don't want to have that conversation and tell people that they deal with X, Y, and Z. Because to the point that you're making, we're highlighting all the strengths and all the superpowers, right? But the reality of it all is that you may be dealing with someone who it took them, they had to prep like days on end for the day that they start work, right? And even on that particular day, they are like in full blown sweat, like, oh gosh, I'm going into this office or I'm going to this interview and I just don't know what to do. Even all the way down to having to have a coaching session with someone before I go into this particular interview, because the level of panic and nervousness that they're experiencing is like at an all-time high, because they don't know how to verbalize, how certain questions that are being asked of them. So let's start there. What are questions that are best utilized when we do interviewing for individuals, just in general, not necessarily trying to eliminate or trying to give preference to those that are neurodivergent, but high value, low stress questions that can get you what you're needing when you are interviewing someone, but doesn't pull that much panicness into it. Does that make sense in what I'm asking?
I got you. Yeah, that is
Mhm.
something. Yeah, because that's something I really enjoy that topic in general on about like
Mhm.
creating community right from the jump. And the one that we have here, and I can't even own it, existed before my time, even when I came to Clarity. So this was a practice that was already put in place, but I do really celebrate now that I'm here and get to join in the fun. Is the very first question out the gate when we sit with people is, "What do you geek out on? What do you find
Wow.
of interest that you stay up late reading up more about?" Like that is our first question because we want to like ignite passion right from the jump to try and help diffuse anxiety. And then I'm sitting there, I'm kind of seeing, can I feel their passion? Can I see like what they're wanting to speak on? And so, and what's interesting is a lot of times people will communicate to us a professional one, and to which I'll appreciate. And then I'll say, and personal. And we
Mhm.
give warning, like we don't just like slide it, like we like confirm that we're going to be asking this because I want for people to kind of think about the vulnerabilities of sharing specialty interests or just interests in general. But also like I really just want to I don't know, feel inspired by someone else's passion. Like right when you watch a TED talk and you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
like because they're
Like I can
passionate.
do it now.
Exactly. And so that's what we're looking for. And then we kind of like fall into some more traditional questions, but we really do that to kind of kick the door open on like help us see you.
Mhm.
You know.
I love that. Did you want to add, Michaela?
No, I think Tyler's got that one.
Yeah, I like that. What do you geek out on? Because you're right. That is something that, that really when you ask a question, you immediately get a smile.
Hmm.
Because their mind immediately thinks about that one thing and they're processing, should I say this or should I not say this, type of
Yep.
thing, and so they're smiling to themselves. And then that's how you know that you've hit a good spot, and you're going to
Yeah.
see the person.
Yeah.
I was watching recently this reality cooking competition. And one of the things that they said to these new chefs was that we want you to bring yourself to the food. We're constantly getting these, very elaborate, pristine dishes, but we want to see who you are. And so I want to say that that is what geeks you out. That's what that is.
Exactly right.
It's a way of bringing that person, so you can clearly see them showing up in their authenticity, of who they are, versus some of
That's
the other
right.
questions that you ask can be very sanitized. And what they're doing is they're going to go with cookie color um, answers. When I deal with conflict, I make sure that I do, kind of
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
because we're all, vying for that coveted job. So you want to give the best thing, but the goal is not necessarily to hire the right person. The goal should be to hire the best person.
Mhm.
And hiring the best person is the most authentic person that comes to your space, because you know that they're going to thrive and shine at your organization. So I love that you gave us that particular example. When we are also looking for retention and leadership pathways, what are ways once we get them hired? So now they're here and now they're on site. What are ways that we can also design systems that can help lead to retention and actually elevate and highlight leadership opportunities?
Yeah, I think I'll just go on with my vague answers, and I think this is also a Tyler question. But providing as much predictability as possible. I think
Mm-hmm.
a lot of things that I hear are like struggling around the lines of it feels like everyone got a manual that I didn't get. Like there's some kind of book So providing structured, whether that be timelines, trainings, whatever it is, and then offering the accommodations proactively, not reactively. Like
Mhm.
when you provide a timeline for let's get these training videos done, or let's get these meetings where you're shadowing someone done, that's where you also want to throw in those questions that Tyler mentioned earlier of, do you work better with this printed out digital?
Mhm.
Do you want a structured out, like step-by-step timeline? Do you want more autonomy in this? And that's proactive. That's also that's a big part of psychological safety. That's going to create a domino effect where your employees are willing and feel more safe to come up to you and ask for adjustments or just accommodations in general as things come up.
So let's take to turn just a little bit, and I don't like to sit in negativity, but I do realize that criticism and constructive criticism comes a part of the workplace.
Mhm.
How do we have challenging conversations, or like I like to say, crucial conversations? So when your work performance is not strong, or when we may be having, a high level of absenteeism, when there may be uh, behavioral, issues, that are proving to be an issue for a team.
Mhm.
So how do we have those crucial conversations?
Ooh.
Yeah, I think, I mean, main word is curiosity. Like,
Michaela, it's like you're in my brain. I was like, yes.
yeah, curiosity. I think oftentimes it's so fixable, and it's something that is not, again, it's not going to have to require someone within the neurodivergent population to identify or to close that themselves, but just to
Mhm.
direct the issue. I think a good example is well, before, when I didn't know I had ADHD, this was in college, but I was working under a professor and we were doing a research project together. It was curiosity, and he wasn't calling out, he didn't name ADHD. It can be as simple as what he said, which he said, sometimes you look like a duck swimming along the pond, but underneath, if we go under the water, you're like this.
Yes,
And
yes, 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 yes.
he's like, is that correct? Never
Mhm.
felt more seen and heard in my life. I didn't need a
That's
label,
me.
right? It was like, and it was even years later until
Yeah.
I sought out a diagnosis. I didn't need that in the moment, but I needed that to be seen. And I would never have even had those words myself or even realized that's not normal. Um, so things like that, it can be as simple as, hey, you might not even want to approach, whether it's absences, whatever, maybe notice the body language. Like, hey, I notice you get a little bit
Mhm.
tense when we're talking about this in meetings. Am I off base or not? Like, be willing to be wrong and address with curiosity.
I
Yeah,
love that.
curiosity married with kind interpretation.
Mhm.
Assume that they care. Assume that
Mhm.
this is important. Assume that they want to do well. And when you're making those assumptions and you're being curious, you can't go wrong.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love that because many years ago I took a personality quiz, and so at that particular time the way that they would do it was like the colors. Red, was alpha person, very assertive, that type of thing, and then your green person was more of your extrovert, in terms of like your salesman type of person. Your yellow was more of a ambivert. They can kind of flip, both sides, intro and extro, type of thing. And then I think it was white, and then your white was a clear extrovert, type of thing. And I found that I was between green and yellow. And of the green and yellow, they used that example right there, and I felt seen was the duck.
Mm,
Just imagine being on a lake and that you are on top. Everyone thinks everything is just as calm and cool, and you're just gliding to the other side. But on the other end, on behind the scenes under the water, your feet are just a pedaling, 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 getting you to the other side. not realizing how much energy that it takes, for you to get to the other side. And I was like, oh my God, this is me 1000%. Because I come from the background of never let them see you sweat. you know, and that used to be a commercials theme for many years. And so because I came from that space of never let them see you sweat, I was always hiding when I was going through something. I presented that this is, a unified front, and that I always got it together. That everything is good, and people always say, "Oh, you always seem like you have it together." But behind the scenes, I was like crying and breaking down
Yeah.
in all types of ways. So I love
So
that you
human.
highlighted that. We are going over a little bit, but we're going to utilize this time to just kind of get through the rest of this. If you all, do you have the additional time, the additional 5 to 10 minutes that we have to get through this? Okay. So the last part of this is how do trust and equity factor into building workplaces? And I think that we've discussed that in somewhat in highlighting trust and equity. But is there anything that you want to leave to that space in terms of trust development? I do like the one pager and leaning in with curiosity opposed to assuming the worst of someone. Is there anything else that you want to add into that space?
I think I covered my topics. What about you, Tyler?
Yeah, I think for me, it's a lot of what individuals in the neurodivergent community benefit from, humans benefit from. The difference is that humans are at the subclinical level. So for as clinicians, we know to look for things that are impacting frequency and severity. So there's presentations of symptoms that are at a certain level of frequency, meaning this is happening so many times a day, and severity, meaning the degree to which it's impairing life. And so the
Mhm.
things that a lot of individuals in the neurodivergent community need, humans need, just at a less frequent or a less severe level. And so we call that subclinical. And so what I think about is like when we're creating a space for individuals with neurodivergence, the difference is they need that,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
humans benefit from it in the neurotypical community. And so when we
Mhm.
actually invest in spaces that are actually accommodating for individuals in the neurodivergent community, it actually does a lot for everyone else too. So when you
That's
think
right.
about having quieter spaces, when you're thinking like at Clarity, like we've started implementing a bunch of crisscross leg chairs, like space, like these big old chairs that you can kind of just cozy up in, and there's standing desks in almost all of our offices. I'm not going to wait for an ADA accommodation to put those in place. Have you tried to get an ADA accommodation? It's really hard.
Hard.
And very
Mhm.
vulnerable. You disclose that to a
Mhm.
lot of people, and yeah. Anyway, so just I would say like making things equitable when you're doing things like helping create a quieter workspace or providing organizational tools like planners or trainings on Google Workspace and how to utilize that platform well, or how to sit or how to stand at a space or timers at your desk to take like breathing breaks and things like that. Everybody benefits. And then the people who have that as a need, not as something that could just be nice in addition to their day to increase their focus, but the people who have the need don't feel outed.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think one of the things I would also add in terms of actual physicality is don't expect everyone to make eye contact. And because it's not a negativity, for some it's a cultural issue, and it's not a behavioral issue. But so in that space to be inclusive, just when you walk into a space, they're not being disrespectful if they're not making eye contact, and that's so
That's
Americanization
right. That's
of
right.
how we are. Like you better make eye contact with me in order for me to feel respected, type of thing. But that's not always the case. So that's one of the things I would add in terms of a strategy that you can utilize to help run your organization. What's one last thing that you want to leave with us that for us to be able to thrive in inclusive spaces?
Um, for me, I would say definitely a call back to like the Harvard Business Journal, that statistic, and to encourage the like leadership accountability on tracking and measuring inclusive efforts and tie that directly with performance because we see a correlation there already that's solidified. And then also just to kind of like shift the frame of mind, like we were just talking about, don't wait on the accommodations, don't wait on those processes. You don't have to shift it from how can these people adjust to us to how can we adapt support that works with all types of brains.
Mhm. Ugh, Michaela, it's so well put. Um, yeah, I think my closing thought is honestly, a lot of my work nowadays with individuals in the neurodivergent community, um, they really do wrestle with feelings of shame. And so please know that like I can think of a few individuals I've had the pleasure of working with as their therapist that um, like when they're disclosing that they have ADHD, like, no, you don't. It's like you don't know what they're going through. Like oftentimes they are like the high performers or the people who have perfectionistic tendencies or the people who will go above and beyond or like lose themselves into a project for 2 hours and skip lunch, right? Like a lot of that can look like they have a good work ethic um in traditional thinking, but it really grates at them and they get home and they crash. And so I think that there are these like shadows of shame voices in their head about. I'll just kind of share some of my own experiences as a closing factor. I still remember it was the annual Tyler, get your head out of your you know where talk that I would hear from individuals in my life. And it wasn't suddenly I got more motivated. It was that shame put me in submission.
That's
Mhm.
right.
And so I then went above and beyond to organize myself and get
Mhm.
my stuff together. And so that's just kind of like one story that I think that a lot of people can kind of resonate with. And also like in all of this, I think we're talking a lot about like the creativity and ingenuity of individuals and kind of like the other side of that is it can sometimes be shame driven.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be. I will also say that you don't lose your superpowers when you tackle your shame. So throw it out there. But also, you don't have to be neurotypical to be creative. You don't have to, or neurodiverse to be creative. You can be neurotypical and still have a lot of these attributes. Remember, subclinical. And so,
Yeah.
like, we are not just speaking. We're not trying to create another situation of othering by swinging the conversation in another
Mhm.
direction. It's that this
That's right.
world was built around people who are neurotypical, and so we don't have to highlight their superpowers because they have more opportunity to celebrate them. So what we're
Mhm.
doing here is just bringing it all together, saying yes and.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. But I will say that it is my belief, and I could be wrong, someone could prove me wrong, but I really believe that the most creative people that we have in this world and some of the most strong innovations came from people who are neurodivergent.
I think you're
It's
onto
just my
something.
belief. So you know. But someone may tell me wrong. This has been such a rich conversation. I so appreciate you both for taking the time out your day for having this conversation with me and with our audience. The recording will be available. I will send it to you once our communications team is done processing it for you and for others. But I just want to thank you. I thank you personally. I thank you on behalf of my family who has one of the most loving neurodivergent persons in my family. I think he is the bee's knees. He is everything.
Yeah.
um, but I also have a level of neurodivergence that I don't share often with others. And so I'm intentional, in how I move in these spaces and move in this
Yeah.
world, because I want people to be seen. And that's at the end of the day, that's all it's about. It's just seeing people, meeting people where they are so they can
Mhm.
thrive, where they can bloom where they're planted. And so that's what it's about. I thank you for this conversation, and I hope you all have a wonderful remainder of your day and a fantastic weekend. And again, we appreciate you so much for the work that you're doing. Do you want to tell your location and your contact information?
Yeah, I would love to. So, Clarity Counseling Center, we actually do accept the insurance of all state health employees. So, if any of you are
Mhm.
here and you're hearing about something that could be helpful for your child or even for yourself, if you kind of just want to have a sounding board here at Clarity Counseling Center. We take y'all's health insurance and we'd love to be able to provide some help there. Clarity Counseling has a couple different specialties, and I'm just going to pull up a few things like OCD. We have a handful of OCD gurus. We have a handful of ADHD experts. Um, Michaela also works with adults with autism. We have child providers and adults and family as well. So please know, like whatever it is, I would love to say that our front desk team, I equate them to Disneyland. They're very, very kind and loving and fun individuals. They're also brilliant matchmakers. So you don't have to do that research if that's overwhelming for you. You can always contact us at 910-240-2489. And we're just right off the Military Cutoff Road, right above PT's Grill. So we're local and we also serve individuals across the whole state through telehealth. It's just been a true pleasure to be here. And if you have a chance to work with Michaela, you wouldn't be disappointed. Michaela's a brilliant practitioner. And so whether you want to seek therapeutic services or even consultation, she's a wealth of knowledge.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Warm and fuzzy. Where's the laugh?
Yes, yes. How can you not be when you're in her presence, you know?
I know. I told her when she first came out, I was like, you look so beautiful. So yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much
Yes.
for having us.
Yes. So I appreciate you all. Again, thank you all. You all go out and be great and have the day that you deserve. And we will talk again soon. Oh, next month, I should have before you all leave. Next month, our discussion is going to be top down, bottoms up, the role of corporate philanthropy in health equity. We look at how companies can move beyond donations to systemic impact and community accountability. We have Lavanya Hardin Wright, who is the head of giving and social impact at Genentech. So I know you thought I was going to say something different when I said tops down, bottoms up, but but it's the role of corporate philanthropy. It's not, swinging at peak. So
That's right. That's right. Thank you so much for having us. And what a beautiful topic. I wanna hear the next one.
Yes. I will make sure that you get a copy of the recording or get the link, so you can sign on. So y'all have a wonderful afternoon and we will talk with you all again soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Mhm.